Greetings, and welcome to the very first video rendition of my new advice column, Ask Syl. That's me, Sylvester Brown Jr. My written response to submitted questions will be featured in Before Ferguson, Beyond Ferguson's newsletter, which is premiering this month, September, and can be found online at beforefergusonbeyondferguson.org. Our first question today comes from AD from St. Louis, who asks, what should the role of educators at all levels be in facilitating and advancing conversations about racial equity in schools? What are the best resources for teachers, and what good ideas and examples are out there? Good question, AD. I've heard this often from good, conscientious white people who sincerely want to make a difference when it comes to matters of race. I applaud anyone who wants to educate young people on matters of race. The easy answer is just to go out there, go with your instincts, and go with your curiosity. For me, I discovered invaluable communications methods when I ran the Sweet Potato Project, a nonprofit I founded in 2012. The goal was to teach urban youth entrepreneurial skills through agriculture. Part of my goal was to get them to see, reflect, and act on their surroundings, which sadly included how they are perceived in the larger society and how race information or misinformation impacts their lives. The number one lesson I learned, and what I want to share with you today, is let them teach you. Get kids to open up, which admittedly can be difficult. But let their comments or their concerns direct your actions or responses. Here's how that played out in real life in my classroom. We started each day with discussions about things happening in the news. For example, in 2014, I had the tough task of hearing how these youth honestly felt about the killing of Mike Brown by a Ferguson cop and the media's coverage of the protests that followed. The feelings of anger and helplessness and hopelessness was overwhelming, to say the least. But first and foremost, I listened. I didn't try to teach, but once I got them to open up, not only was it quite revealing, their comments directed me to find the answers that they were seeking. Noting their thoughts and their feelings, I brought in people who could address and offer solutions. Solutions to their feelings about police brutality, about being stereotyped and being treated as if they were less than. I was able to introduce rappers or celebrities who talked or sang about police brutality and race. And we had long conversations on the topic. The key for me was letting these kids feel like they had control over the topics and that I was just a passive observer or a non-judgmental facilitator of the conversation. That way, race or racial equity and solutions and remedies became topics of their choosing and not an assignment or a directive from me, the teacher. My job was to provide resources based on their questions, answers, and observations. The key for me was letting the kids feel like they had control over the topic. I wanted them to feel like I was just a passive observer or a non-judgmental facilitator of the conversations. That way, race or racial equity and solutions and remedies became topics of their choosing and not an assignment or a directive from me, the teacher. My job was to provide resources based on their questions, answers, and observations. For example, I invited a well-known policeman, I believe he was a lieutenant with the St. Louis Police Department, to come to the class and have an honest, no-hold-barred conversation with the students about what they can do to avoid or report the behavior of bad police officers. Now, it's important to note that my students were between the ages of 16 and 21. For advice on reaching younger kids, I suggest you turn to the internet. For example, I found a source titled Resource Guide for White Teachers and Parents Developing Racial Consciousness and Moving into Action. Some of the topics with links included Raising Race-Conscious Children, a resource for talking about race with young children. Teaching While White, a podcast and a blog. Teaching Tolerance. It was an educator's website. Racial Equity Tools. It was another website with resources. Facing History and Ourselves, another website for educators. Culturally Responsive Leadership. This was a whole list of website resources. EmbraceRace.org. This was a supporting caregivers to raise children who are brave. And lastly, but there's more, Anti-Racism Resources for Educators. Educating for Equity. This is ran by a guy by the name of Ali Michael. By clicking the links, I found some excellent advice on race and racial equity education. I invite you to check it out and use what you can, and honestly, discard what doesn't move you, motivate you, or inform you. And of course, there's Jane Elliott, the former primary school teacher from Iowa, and I guess the godmother of modern diversity training. She has some excellent advice, but for me personally, I find Miss Elliott's take no prisoners educational style, I imagine it's a bit intimidating for some well-meaning whites. But again, that's your call. If you like Miss Elliott, she gives the resources. But just be prepared for her to get in your face and challenge your beliefs. In summary, my advice is this. If you want to teach racial equity or race consciousness, allow yourself to be the student. Let age-appropriate students, black or white, lead you to the valuable information and resources you can share with them. If you don't know, find someone who does. Find someone who has honed the gift of communicating this difficult topic with kids. It may be an educator, it may be an activist, it may be a well-intentioned cop, or it might be a seasoned journalist like myself. In a society that's still marred by racism, we all have a role to play in preparing youth to navigate this world. In closing, I want you to embrace your desire, your instincts to facilitate or advance conversations about race and race equity in schools. Let your heart guide you, and surely, I guarantee you, you'll find the path you seek. This has been Ask Syl. Join me again for our next question and response.